gone on way too long. And that was in January, middle of January of when they talked to me. It was in like the 16th or 17th of January of 1980. And the latter part of that year, when they talked to me, and then the company doctor and I went out to see Irene and let her know that I was in trouble. And we walked in the house, and the company doctor met her, and she said, "Well, what are you all doing here?" And he said, "Well, you know, your husband's got a drinking problem." And she said, "Well, what took you SOBs so long to figure that out?" She was screaming at the top of her lungs. So you might think that Nana was sweet and lovable and wonderful all the time, but she'd had it with me by then. So they suggested I go to a place that would help with people with alcohol problems. And I went there and met a lady by the name of Mary Libb, and she helped me a lot and told me what I needed to do, and was probably one of the first times in my whole life that I'd really surrendered and given up. And I got out of there early because they didn't like me much, and I wasn't doing what they wanted me to do. It's a 28-day program, and they got rid of me in 2.5 weeks. And I went to a group of Alcoholics Anonymous called Aquarius, and that's where I really learned what to do and how to do it and how to save my life and save my family with me and the church and everything else. And it got better from there on. But in any case, they kind of pushed me to the side in Xerox, and I came back, and I was going to meetings, and I was working a little bit with John, and he was directing me, and that went on a little while. And I'd come down there as a region sales manager and got demoted because of my issues, and then they moved me back when some of them and Ernie Riddle went to Rochester. They moved me back as a region sales manager working for John, and then he retired, or didn't retire, he went to Birmingham, Alabama as a branch manager. He demoted himself because he wanted to kind of semi-retire, and they promoted me to vice president region manager. The Southwest region was Xerox, and by then I wasn't going to church much. I was fairly inactive. I'd come and go, but I loved my job and loved the people, and I was traveling some, not a lot, but still some. I had Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and New Mexico. And I had about 1,300 people under me because I had sales, service, and administration, and we had a lot of business in Texas with Dallas and Houston and Austin and San Antonio, and then some in the other places. But Louisiana is a very tough place to do business for anybody, by the way, but that's a side note. So it grew, and then it started to go downhill because of the oil business, and the oil fields started to clamp up, and there was trouble in River City in terms of the business with Xerox, and they thought that I ought to do some other things, and they moved me aside and promoted a guy they split it really, because it was, they went high-end business and a low-end business, and they made two jobs out of it, but it had sales only, and my job would have been much less. And they wanted me to go to the West Coast and move back to the West Coast, to California. And I said, "No, I'm not doing that. Can't do it." But I said, "I can work out there if you want." So they had a job for me. That's what they wanted me to do. So I lived out there during the week and would come back and forth for a year. I did that. And that's not something I'd recommend, but it's something you do, I guess, when you finally have to and resign yourself that you're not going to keep moving around. So that lasted about a year, a little over, and then I had a job in Xerox in the office systems business, and had a technical group were reporting to me, and we were developing applications, etc., out in Louisville. And that lasted, another year. I'm just giving you rough times on all this. And then they decided they were going to move the operation to the Bay Area. And I went in to meet with my boss, and he said, "Well, we're moving out there, but we're not taking you." And I said, "Really? Where am I going?" And they said, "Well, you'll have to find a job." So I thought, well, I've paid all this price and been all this good guy for Xerox, and they're treating me poorly. But anyway, I then hooked on with my old friend Ernie Riddle, and he hired me for a job in Rochester. So I had an apartment in Rochester, and I lived in Dallas and commuted back and forth to Rochester, which was not a particularly good experience, but you know, that's what it was. And I survived, and I got through that period and got done, and I was kind of on the back end of that with another deal going on in Dallas, but then that wasn't working out so well, and I started to think, well, I'll retire real early. I was going to retire at 55, and I don't know, I was kind of down one day, and I got a call from my old friend Dave Myerscough, who had been promoted and was in corporate now and was the marketing vice president for the entire corporation. He said, well, Brown, I got something I need you to do. And I thought, oh no, here we go. He said, I want you to run the Olympics for Xerox. And I went crazy. I said, oh my heavens, what? Let me just think about what that might be. And he described it, and he said, yeah, and we're behind. And I said, yeah, I bet you are. And that meant to go to Norway for the Winter Olympics, which was about a year off, and then to run Atlanta, which was the biggest Olympics they'd ever had in the United States by far. And it was an exciting job. It was a lot of fun. I did a lot of traveling. I was engaged with the Olympic Committee. Did a lot in Xerox. We had 3,500 people come and go in Atlanta, and I literally was kind of living there for on and off for 2 years, getting ready for everything, and both technically as well as you know, tickets and the ambiance and the hotel and everything. And I had good people working for me, and I particularly had a young lady working for me who was willing to take risk, and I was too. And she worked with the West Coast, and we did some technical things that they'd never seen done in Xerox, and they said that couldn't be done, and we did them. And it was an exciting time to show them to the corporate people that came, and particularly Paul Lair at the time that was president, and had invested a lot of money, millions of dollars, for us to do what we did. So it was a lot of fun, and at the end of it, I decided that they wanted me to go to Japan and Australia for the next wave of the Olympics and keep the job for at least another 3 or 4 years. And I said, well, if you'd buy me out for a little while, I said, I think I'd just soon retire, because I really didn't want to be traveling again and leave Irene and just go through the whole process. Irene and I had grown much, much closer together, and I think let me just come off that just a little bit and talk about Irene and I, because I think it's important for everybody that listens to this to understand what the relationship really happened and a part of it turned out to be. I think we, for the first time in a long time on and off, probably, and some more will happen later when I get into some other things that have happened in retirement. But I think for the first time we really started to accept each other as we were and are, and that we started to deeply love each other. And love is a fleeting moment, as we know sometimes. But in my definition, love is doing something for somebody else because you want to, not because you have to. So if we're behaving in that manner with our spouse, we've probably got a really good thing going. If we're accepting each other as we are and not trying to change each other, we've got a good thing going. And I really recommend that you continue to look at your relationship, whatever that might be today, and how is it coming, and how is it doing, and are we really in that mode? So that's a little side note between my wife, now deceased, and I, and what we had to develop. And I give her all the honor, because as I tell people, I probably wouldn't have stayed with me for sure, but here we were. So I retired at the end of 1997 after they well, really, most of 97 I wasn't doing anything. I was on their payroll, but not doing anything to speak of. We wound up Atlanta in 96, and then I worked to the end of that year, and then really started on the retirement side prior to that. Luckily, I had some stock options and got a hold of a good financial advisor, and it helped get us through a couple of years there without doing much of anything, drawing on any money that I had to the side and saved and put away, and it's all worked out about as well as I could define it. I think about Dean and Eric and Stephanie and where they are today in terms of their marriages and their spouses and their family, and you know, we're all on the good road. We're all on the positive road. We're all in the light, and you know, we got to be in the light. If we don't have the light of the Savior and the light of Christ, and really have that light on and continue to work on that area, you know, the light starts to dim, and then we start to look at other things, and we start to fade away, and we don't go to church, and we don't go to sacrament meeting to partake of the sacrament and renew our covenants, and we don't go to the temple, and we don't hold those recommends, and things just parlay, and our life goes to pot. So those are areas I would really suggest you keep a close watch on. So after retirement, you know, we were kind of doing our things between Irene and I, and going on some trips, and we still had the place in Destin, but not too long after that, we had enjoyed Destin for a family vacation place, and for Irene and I to go as well. But the revenue was declining and the expenses were increasing, so we'd put a lot of money in the place in Destin, not a lot, but we'd put some money in Destin and in the place, and we sold that, and it was a good thing as it all turned out. Of course, it's all went through the very low period and has come back, and now is, of course, a very expensive area to be and very different. But I'm glad we enjoyed it when we did, and I will never forget it, because there was a lot of good memories in Destin. I met a couple of gentlemen who became very, very close friends, Bob Norcross and Dave Wall, and Dave's still alive and kicking in Atlanta, and I talk to him usually every other week or so, if not more often than that. We're good friends with each other. But anyway, I was playing a lot of golf at the time, or seemed to be, and then I got tired of that, and I was working a couple of consulting jobs, and I was, I don't know, it just didn't seem like things were just perfect, but it was good. And we had a nice place. We had moved from the place on McCamey to Gansett in Plano, and it was a 0 lot line, and just a perfect house for us for size, and Irene and I, and we had the master bedroom was downstairs, which was great, and everything was good. And I don't know, it was one Friday night, I heard Irene in the bathroom, and water running in the basin, and all of a sudden I jumped up and opened the door, and water was running on the floor, and she looked at me like a person I didn't know, and she had had a very, very serious stroke, and that was in 1990. Let's see, is that right? 1990, no, I'm sorry. It was 2009. 2009 she had the stroke. And I put her back to bed with me, and I hugged her, and I held her, and I thought she'd had a nervous breakdown, but in any case, it was a stroke. And I got Stephanie to come over the next morning, and she and I got her dressed a little bit and got her in the car and took her over to the Plano Texas Resources Hospital. And she had had a stroke and was she was in a coma somewhat, and then they put her in a medically induced coma to really try and see what would happen. And then Stephanie and I were there, and then Dean came, and then Eric came, and they had told Stephanie and I that it'd probably be best if we let her go, that we didn't try and save her. And I said, we can't, I don't know. And then we thought about it, and it got worse for a few days. And we all were praying actively, and I then decided it was time to take a move, and I planned the funeral. And I pretty much laid it out, and Dean worked on it too, and I made phone calls, and I had the stake center scheduled in Plano, and Brian Rass, the bishop, and everything. And the next day she opened her eyes, and we went from there. and to